Welcome to Dairy Pod, a podcast series from Dairy Australia. Featuring a range of experts, each episode offers insights into Australia's unique dairy farming conditions, as well as personal experiences and the latest in dairy innovation.
Hi everyone, welcome to Dairy Pod. My name's Andy Hancock. I'm the Sustainable Animal Care Manager at Dairy Australia. I guess my background is that I'm a vet. I've worked in clinical practice, I've worked in industry, government and academia, and now I work at Dairy Australia. And my role is to oversee the animal care commitment of the Australian Dairy Sustainability Framework on behalf of industry. Today, I'm speaking with dairy farmer Graeme Nicoll, and we're unpacking what the 2025 Sustainability Scorecard is telling us about where the dairy industry is at, with a special focus on animal care and husbandry. Graeme, are you able to introduce yourself and your role in the industry?
Yeah, thanks, Andy, and thanks for having me on the Dairy Pod. I'm a dairy farmer from South Gippsland, where we run a dairy and a dairy beef operation down on the coast in southeastern Victoria. And I also chair the Australian Dairy Sustainability Framework Steering Committee, which is a committee of the Australian Dairy Industry Council.
Great. And so in your role as chair, I'd really love to know what, in your opinion, why sustainability and the sustainability framework matters to dairy farmers.
Sustainability, it's essential to the future of the Australian dairy industry and maintaining a profitable and resilient industry. And the sustainability framework and the sustainability reports and scorecards are critical for maintaining that transparency and addressing stakeholders' expectations and demonstrating our progress as an industry against our dairy promise to provide nutritious food for a healthier world. It's really critical that the buyers of our product, both within Australia, overseas, our consumers and the community, understand how we produce our food from both on the farm right through the processing sector, and how as an industry we're progressing in that sustainability space.
So I understanding that we've just released the 2025 Sustainability Scorecard. So obviously that's a good indicator of how we are progressing. Do you want to run us through some of the highlights of that?
Look, the 2025 scorecard that we've just released sort of presents the most current data available across the four commitments of the industry, being best care for animals, strengthening economic viability in communities, improving well-being and protecting the environment. And some people think of sustainability just being caring for the environment, but the way the Australian dairy industry reports on sustainability, it covers that whole breadth of economic viability of our industry, caring for our animals, and protecting the environment. These commitments reflect the responsibility the dairy industry has in terms of caring for our regional communities, our customers, and the natural systems that support our dairy systems.
I think what I was saying before is our approach to sustainability is evolving in line with consumer, society, and industry needs and changes in the science. So we are undergoing a wholesale review of all of the elements of the framework, but we are really excited to announce that in 2025 we've got a refresh of the animal care commitments. But before I get into the specifics of that update, I'd really like to understand from your perspective as the framework steering committee chair, Graeme, that a bit more detail about that review process.
Well, I guess it's no sort of news to anyone that as a dairy industry we operate in a rapidly changing environment, which is shaped by community expectations, climate risk, changing technology available on farm, and just a wide range of emerging issues. So as part of keeping the industry's reporting up to date and keeping up with the rapid changes within our industry too, as farmers adopt new practices, milk processors adopt new practices, improve practices within their processing facilities, every few years we conduct what we call a materiality assessment, which is an assessment of all the influences, the impacts within the dairy industry and on the dairy industry. And we do that assessment and then compare that to how we're reporting now, and see if we're reporting on the things that people care about, if we're reporting on the things that are important to both our consumers and our buyers of our product. And so this is how we've got to this review of the animal care that you're talking about, Andy.
Yeah, thanks, Graeme. And that's probably a good segue in terms of understanding what's relevant, what are relevant practices and what's important to industry and consumers at the time. So, what was in the current animal care commitment included things like calving induction and tail docking that have now been phased out by industry. And we've had really successful programs to do so. But we still need to understand, well, that's great that we've done that, but what are the other things that are important to our animals first and foremost, but also, community and industry. So as part of the new commitments or the new targets in the animal care commitment include the development of a whole of industry animal care assurance program, the development of a whole of industry roadmap for the management of non-replacement calves, as well as a number of existing practices where we want to understand what it is that the industry is currently doing and how we could potentially do things better from an animal welfare perspective. And the process of updating this was through a series of consultations, not only with community and industry, but with farmers as well. So one of the key highlights is that now we've actually got a new goal within the animal care commitment, which is focused purely on biosecurity. So this reflects the importance not only to our farming communities, but to the Australian economy as a whole, as we currently have a privileged animal health and biosecurity status, especially as it relates to our export markets. But that's probably a good point to bring it back to the double materiality assessment that was undertaken recently, because biosecurity and animal care were identified as really important in terms of materiality on that assessment. So, Graeme, do you want to talk a little bit through that process?
So the process is, as I said earlier, it's a whole of industry thing. So this isn't just a few people in a room coming up with goals and targets for our industry. This is our industry looking at what pressures are on the industry, what the industry is achieving, and working through as a whole of industry coming up with goals and targets. So this process began way back in 2012, when the Australian dairy industry was the first ag sector in Australia and one of the first ag sectors globally to start reporting on its sustainability achievements. So we've led the way as an ag sector and as an industry in the dairy industry in Australia. And this process is an ongoing process of refining what our goals and targets are. It's something that the whole industry gets behind. The framework, as I said earlier, is owned by Australian Dairy Industry Council, which is a collaboration of ADF, Australian Dairy Farmers, and ADPF, Australian Dairy Processors. They come together, and with the whole industry working on these goals and targets, we report on them annually. And Dairy Australia plays a significant role in helping the industry meet those goals and targets.
It'd be good to put your farmer hat on now and take your framework steering committee chair hat off, and just understand how some of the elements within the framework reflect practices on farm or what you're seeing on farm. We do have, as part of the development of a whole of industry calf management roadmap, we're really proud to have launched the CalfWays initiative, which is a 3-year co-innovation agreement between Dairy Australia and Meat and Livestock Australia, to help implement the activities that sit within the CalfWays roadmap. So helping to create valued market chains for our non-replacement calves, and really to help create economically viable and sustainable opportunities for non-replacement calves, primarily in the beef from dairy supply chain. Can I ask you, as a farmer who've worked in the dairy beef space for some time now, how do you see changes in the management of surplus calves? How have you seen that evolve over the last decade?
I think it's really exciting as an industry. Like one of our industry goals within the framework was to develop a plan for non-replacement dairy calves, and we've now got that plan, and that's a plan to help those that are looking at ways of managing non-replacement calves on their farm to do it better, to find pathways within this, to find ways to actually manage the non-replacement calves on their farm. So in our business, we've for a long time grown out a lot of the vast majority of our calves. We run a dairy beef operation on another property, but we've gone about that through using strategic use of sex semen within our dairy herd. So all our replacements on our farm are bred through use of sex semen, and then we use a significant, all the other cows in the herd are joined to beef breeds. But how different farms adopt these practices are going to be very different from region to region. Resources that people have on their farm. We've structured our business up in a way that we can do that. Not to say that's the right practice for every farm. That's what works for us.
One of the key things that came through in the consultation process for the development of the CalfWays roadmap was that every region and farming system have their own unique challenges and opportunities when it comes to non-replacement calves. So, that's been something that we've focused on in the implementation. And actually, just earlier in May, we launched the Tasmanian CalfWays Action Plan in AgFest in Launceston. And the purpose of that is really to deliver regionally specific activities that help to address regionally specific challenges for, in this case, Tasmania. But we'd like to look at how we can do that across all dairying regions and across systems. So it's really important to note that. And I think we see that also in other elements of the animal care program, is that there are differences between regions and between calving patterns and between systems with respect to welfare practices, and trying to properly assess that and, make sure that the resources that Dairy Australia provides to assist farmers is regionally specific is really important.
On that last point, if you look across the nation, the use of dairy beef within the dairy herd, or beef breeds within the dairy herd, has significantly changed within the last 5 years. The discussion amongst farmers has changed. Whilst there's regional specifics to it, and there's different practices on different farms, as a gross overall trend, there has been a significant trend towards the use of sex semen, and there's been a significant trend towards the use of beef sires within dairy herds. So, that's the sort of thing we're striving for, is big trends in a direction.
Yeah, no, it's a really good point, and it is a good example of that is the results of the most recent Animal Husbandry and Genetics Survey. So the Animal Husbandry and Genetics Survey measures dairy farmer practices and attitudes regarding animal health, welfare, fertility, and herd genetics. The data is based on 400 randomly conducted interviews and provides statistically robust insights with a national margin of error of 4.2%. So what that's saying is that it is a statistically representative sample of the Australian dairy industry. Yeah, we'd love to have 4,000 surveys and get everyone's opinion, but obviously that's not feasible. But the way that the survey's been designed is that it captures the thoughts of all of the specific dairying regions, as well as different farm sizes, different farm types, management structures, etc. So the reason that we do this, we do it every 3 years. And the reason that we do it is it informs priorities for improving on-farm performance and helps to ensure that the industry is aligned with community expectations and sustainable practices. So the survey has been running for 20 years now. 2025 was a 20th anniversary. We've seen significant changes in animal management, health and welfare practices over the 20 years, including some of the other things in the survey around genetics and fertility, but we're focusing today on animal care. So the survey asks questions about how dairy farms manage things like disbudding, management of down cows, lameness prevention, management of calves, biosecurity. So it covers across a broad spectrum of some of the management practices that are common to every dairy farmer in Australia. And we've seen generally across the board in those practices improvement. But I wanted to narrow down onto one particular case study or example of practice change that I think has been, really demonstrative of the Australian dairy industry's commitment to best care for animals, and that's disbudding. So disbudding is the process of removing the horn or the tissue that creates the horn from young dairy calves. The reason that we don't want horns on dairy animals is that they actually tend to turn into a welfare issue, because those animals with horns can actually cause injuries to each other as well as potentially farm staff. So animals with horns are hard to manage. So it's important that we disbud dairy calves at a young age and remove that tissue that will become the horn. And there's a number of different ways it can be done. One way is to prevent the horn from growing in the first place, which is the use of animals that are bred as polled or animals that would never have horns. The problem with that is that the genetic pool for animals that don't have horns or polled animals is quite small. And so to be able to reach all of the breeding strategies on farm, we can't just choose polled animals. So that is changing. And actually the use of polled genetics has increased from 10% in 2016 to 54% in 2025. So we're seeing a much larger uptake in polled genetics, which means those animals don't even need disbudding. But for those that do, which is still a large proportion of calves that are raised, we've seen a really strong improvement in the practices used to make sure that the best possible welfare outcomes are achieved as we do this. So disbudding before 2 months has been shown to be the best time to do it, and that's increased significantly over the last 10 years. And also at the same time, people are using anti-inflammatories and preoperative local anaesthetic to ensure that the process is as gentle as possible on the calves. So we've seen a big uptake in that over the last few years as well. This is in parallel to a program that Dairy Australia has been updating the disbudding resources that are available to farmers, including a number of workshops, videos, etc., guidelines. And we see that generally, and this is something that was reflected in the survey, we see that where farmers have attended specific training on specific practices, whether it's disbudding or other things, that we do tend to see an uptake and adoption of those practices in those farmers as well. So I think overall that's a good news story. There's plenty of things we could work on as well, and we continue to do so. I've been talking too much, Graeme. What are your thoughts on some of the results of the survey?
One of the things that's always excited me about being a dairy farmer and being a part of this dairy industry is the industry's desire and ability to adopt new technologies and adapt and change. I think it's not unique to the dairy industry, but it's a strength of the dairy industry that we adopt and adapt and change. And that's just the nature, I guess, of a lot of dairy farm businesses. And I think that reflects in that sort of 25-year trend that you're talking about, Andy. If I think of talking to my colleagues and other dairy farmers, things like pain relief and use of anti-inflammatories has become very much a routine practice on farm now for any situation which will provide discomfort or pain for our animals. And And in all reality, that wasn't the practice when I started farming before you started doing those surveys. So, I think those sort of gradual changes within our industry, we don't always sort of recognize. They just sort of slowly happen. And that's the real value of things like the sustainability reporting, because we get to track those changes over time, and we can demonstrate to our buyers, our community, our consumers that we are, as an industry, adapting, changing, and responding to the environment that we operate in now.
Thanks, Graeme. I think that probably is a good time to talk about what's the future for the Australian Dairy Sustainability Framework.
Yeah, so the 2025 scorecard reflects some changes in our goals and targets around animal care. And we've just gone through a process of working through the other 4 commitments with broader industry consultation. And the 2026 scorecard will strengthen the industry's reporting on climate resilience, environmental performance, and social impact. So those changes will work through the system, and within our 2026 scorecard, there'll be some changes there. But sustainability reporting, it's an ongoing process. It requires that sort of reflection on what we've achieved, what we're adapting to as an industry, and the continuous improvement that's happening within our industry. And that is, for our whole industry, not just our reporting, an ongoing process.
Thank you very much, Graeme, for your time. I really appreciated our discussion today. If anyone wants to know a little bit more about the Australian Dairy Sustainability Framework, or the most recent Sustainability Scorecard, that should be a link in the episode notes. And yeah, thank you very much for your time.
And I'd just like to sort of reinforce that, sustainability is something farmers and their teams are already doing. And the industry is trying to support, the practices we have on farm and within the processing sector too, because this is a whole of industry game.
Absolutely. Great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining today's Dairy Pod episode. We hope you found it enjoyable and insightful. For more information, check out the episode notes. You can stay up to date by following Dairy Pod on your favourite podcast platform. To get in touch, visit dairyaustralia.com.au. Until next time, take care.